Dealing with referees, social media, personal habits, and self care. If I think about the common complaints that coaches have, these are three common ones I hear coaches having about their players. Right? They complain that their players complain and argue with referees too much. I hear coaches they complain about how their players not only waste time on social media, but they fail to present themselves in a professional manner. And I also hear coaches complain about their athletes' poor nutrition, their poor sleep, and their unwillingness to do things like mental training. And yet, while many, and I mean many coaches, including myself, have complained about our athletes in at least one, if not all three of these things, my question is, how are we doing in these areas? How do we treat referees? How do we use social media? Are we professional with it? Do we use it to promote the culture we are trying to create and the leadership that we are trying to demonstrate? And how about our personal habits? Like, do we sleep well? Do we eat right? Do we exercise? Do we do things like mental training? The truth is, most of us struggle with a few of these things. And the reality is, our example speaks way louder than anything we tell our players. Now, today's episode is part 2 of our conversation around advice for new coaches. We're going to discuss referees, social media, and self-care. And whether you are a new coach or not, I know you're going to get a lot of value out of this episode. So welcome back to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerbun, and I'm joined by the team, Nate Sanderson and Betsy Butter. This podcast exists to help you grow as a leader and build a better culture. If you want to get the notes to this and every episode of the Coaching Culture Podcast, head on over to tocculture.com. There you can subscribe to our newsletter and check out our newest online courses, the Foundations Coaching course and the Working with Sports Parents course. Also, if you want to learn more about Betsy Butterick, subscribe to her blog. You want to check out her social media, head on over to betsybutterick.com. All right, let's get going with the second part of our conversation. Okay, so we're going to transition into the second part of our conversation around, advice that we would give to new head coaches or to young first-time head coach JP. And these are 3 areas now that are probably a little less talked about, but I think they really create a lot of problems for coaches, and definitely some things that took me a while to learn. And the first of this is referees, and my gosh, I was ejected so many times as a young coach, had to pay fines, forced coach development seminars there. So, Betsy, what advice would you give myself? Because I know Nate's always been calm. I don't think he's ever gotten a technical in his 20 years of coaching.
So then this is going to sound cliche, but referees, officials are people too. And the analogy, I had an opportunity once to do a communication workshop with a bunch of Division I basketball officials. And I said, I think about the nature of the work that you all do, and the relationship from the outset is so unfairly set up. I said, imagine if you went to a restaurant and let's say Nate's the server, and Nate comes over to the table for the first time and says, "Hi, welcome. My name's Nate. I'll be your server for this evening. Allow me to tell you about tonight's specials," and then starts to tell us about the specials. Can you imagine if partway through the specials, someone like slammed their fist on the table and the silverware jumps in, they're like, "Chicken! I want the rosemary chicken, and I don't want the fingerling potatoes. I want them mashed. You mashed them for the prime rib. I want the mashed potato." It's like, you would never do that. You would never do that when a server first walks up to the table. And yet I see across the board, that's a coach's first interaction sometime with the officials for their sport. It's like, what are we doing? So best practices, and we did this when I was coaching basketball, and I know it's a common practice for many coaches, is you have that sheet before the game that tells you all the information, the timeline, the starting lineups, whatever it is. It also has the officials' names. Know the officials' names before the start of your competition. And we used to write them on pieces of athletic tape, and we had them on the side of the scorer's table so that we knew the officials' names when it was time to have a conversation. The second is you usually meet the officials, at least in basketball we do, before the start of a game. When you say hi, also say thank you. Express gratitude in some form. Like, that is the controllable thing that will set you up for success with officials and conversations during competition more than anything else. "Hi, Nate, thank you so much for officiating our game today. We're looking forward to a great match." Just that small piece of gratitude, that resonates differently, and it sets the pathway for conversation. Now, when I mention conversation, it is not berating the officials as the first point of contact. So I highly encourage coaches to start with questions. Even if you use the phrase that's not necessarily a question, but a prompt of, help me understand, and then insert the context or the call that they just made, especially when you disagree. And even using phrasing like, I saw that differently. Help me understand how blank was a foul, right? Or asking, so I can help my players. So give them the why right away. So I can help my players adjust what needs to be true. Again, I use that question often in different contexts. Or so I can help my players. How can they best blank in the same situation, right? So asking about adjustments, asking about what they see, especially when it's different from what you've observed, especially when you think that what they see is maybe fictitious or you don't want it to be true for the rest of the competition. But start by asking questions, start by having a conversation, lead with their name, lead with gratitude. Those would be some of the best practices that I can offer coaches of any sport, no matter how long you've been coaching, to at least give us a shot at having a productive and positive official coach relationship. Because what unintentionally happens when we go to war or fight a battle in, I'll say, defense of our players, is we unintentionally set our team up for failure. And not failure in, is it going to dictate the outcome of the game? If it's close, maybe, but we're certainly not setting them up for success to the point where the official is now looking to make calls that support our ability to be successful. If anything, we see those small minutes, we call them makeup call, right? Like, we see those small minutes of retribution happen through their official role or capacity in the game because of conversations that we as coaches could have handled differently. So keeping that in mind, like, every conversation that we have, every point that we choose to make, depending on our tone, volume, timing, it has an influence on how that game is going to be officiated. And a lot of coaches know that, and so they will berate an official strategically. Also, long term, not a recipe for success. So think through, what do I want to say or ask? Why? And then, is this the most advantageous way to set my team up for success in the minutes that we have left in this game?
Yeah, I think one of the tough things about this one as a first year coach is that you have no record with officials. So the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to dealing with officials for me is that we have a scouting report on our officiating crew. So I'll make sure I get from our athletic secretary that she finds out the names of the officials. If I don't know them, I'll text my coaching buddies and say, hey, have you guys had this crew? And then we pass that information on. They call it tight. They're not going to take any shit, whatever it might be, to the players so that they know what to expect as well. If it's going to be a physical game or, what have you, they call a lot of travels, especially as we get closer to the postseason. Like we do a paragraph in our written scouting report on officials, right? So I think for us, it goes even beyond just here are the names, but we want our players to be prepared for how the game is going to potentially be called. And that's hard to do in your first year because you don't know anybody yet necessarily, unless you have a track record as a player. And that might not have been great for first year JP either. But the other thing that I think is important for coaches to remember is that you are leaving a first impression in your first year of coaching. And officials talk as much as coaches talk about the asshole on the sideline or the guy over here that wouldn't shut up or he didn't know the rule and he's still complaining about something. I can't tell you how many times an official's come to me and said, hey, we had this guy the other day and you wouldn't believe what he was arguing and tell me this story, about them not knowing the rule. So you want to do your best to leave a first impression. And one of the ways to think about, well, what do I want them thinking of me is to consider how you would coach your players to respond to a bad call or to a mistake by an official and model that. Like let them see that in you first, and that's probably going to set some pretty good parameters for your behavior and interaction with officials on the sideline. I want to add a couple real quick ones here too, JP. I think one thing that's also been important for us is that, the official shortage is a real thing, and that's basketball, baseball, softball. I mean, you go down the line, it's harder and harder to find people willing to officiate. And we talk about that in our parent meeting at the start of the year. And one of the things that I emphasize with our parents is that I don't ever want our crowd to be the reason an official says, this just isn't worth it anymore. So we talk about gratitude, not just from coach to referee or players to referees, but also to our parents to understand that if we don't have officials, we don't have games. And we've had sports, especially at the lower levels, where they've canceled games because we have not had officials. We don't ever want to be the reason for that. And I think that's been sobering for our parents to think through a little bit, and has been a good place to position them as well. Last thing I'll add here, when it comes to just, what are some little tips for dealing with officials actually like in live play in the heat of the moment? You're right, JP. I've never gotten a technical in 22 years of coaching here. It's not that I didn't necessarily deserve one, but I do think when you're interacting with them as human beings, starting with their names, I think self-depreciating humor goes a long ways. So, we get called for an over the back or a bad foul on an offensive rebound, and the official comes over, and I might just say to him, "Hey, Scott, these guys won't listen to me, but could you please remind 45 to box out next time?" And they'll start laughing or whatever. So the more you can just drop those things, not like, "Geez, you missed that one. Are you going to be all right driving home tonight?" Like not ones that are some kind of a snide attack at the official, but just deprecating humor toward myself. We can chuckle a little bit about that. That goes a long ways. And then this is a little bit tongue in cheek, JP, but I always offer to help. So, if they didn't have a good angle, they'll come over, "Coach, I didn't have the angle there." I said, "I had a great angle. If you guys ever need any help, I'm here to be your fourth man if you need it." And just, again, it's just little things like that, it just adds a little bit of levity to try to balance out some of those more intense moments. And the last thing that I'll add here too is you get to know officials better, and you start to see them at different places, and you recognize them. You just say, "Hey, what's going on?" You really do start to build relationships with those officials, especially if they keep coming back and doing your games. And there are guys that officiate our games that have been to our wiffle ball field and played wiffle ball in our yard, and that, we talk to outside of the season. I went to one cruise. I got initiated into the Hall of Fame last summer, and I went to their, ceremony or whatever as a guest. So there is a lot of value, just as Betsy said, starting from this place of referees are people too. And maybe the moment that I'm maybe most proud of, we had an official whose father passed away like a month before this game that we had. And just late in the game, the game was decided, and he was standing right in front of me, and I just said, "Hey man, really sorry to hear about your dad," and just like patted him on the bobo as he went by. Like just little things like that to recognize their humanity. It really does go a long, long ways in building a really positive coach official relationship.
I have a few things I have to mention. I mean, one is I feel this deep desire to write a few people apologies, referees over the years. And I say that, but I actually genuinely mean it. There's a problem, and you guys have highlighted it today, which is I don't know their names. Their names I created for them were just snide, mean names that me and my assistants would call them, just to ourselves. But I never learned their names. It's really interesting. Before you guys even started sharing, I wrote down 3 things: build a relationship, learn how to communicate, and express gratitude. And you guys have hit on all 3 of those things. I mean, build a relationship, get to know them as people. One of the coolest ways I've seen a coach do this in my work consulting, and it was really actually fascinating, is the referees. That it was a high school basketball team, and the referees changing area was right off of the coach's office. And I was like, at first, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I would never have stood for that when I was, a high school basketball coach." And then I saw like it play out over the course of that game. I was like, "Oh, that was beautiful." Like the referees come in, it's like it's everyone's greeting each other by a first name basis. They're just, shooting the shit before the game, and the coaches and the referees, they're just. It was truly an advantage to build that relationship and that rapport. And the coach brought the referees water. "Hey, if you guys need anything else, just give us a shout." So just like attending to them, getting to know them, not just their name, but a little bit about them. To your point, Nate, knowing them on a human level, and then the rest of the day, same tactics you guys were both talking about, speaking to them in a way that they would want to be spoken to. And just when you do it that way, when you bring a bit of humor, when you don't take yourself too seriously, when you accept that they're going to be human and make mistakes, I think everything just goes so much better. And especially with your players, I think you and your players demonstrating and expressing gratitude at the end of a game, regardless of whether you thought they did a good job or not. To your point, they still made the game possible, Nate, right? Like they without them, the game's not possible. And so just finding the time to express that gratitude. What is most powerful about all this is, yes, it respects them as human beings, I think, and it helps you to maybe get better calls, which is a great positive as well. But I think what's really actually interesting and powerful is when coaches treat referees this way, when they stop blaming the referees and they just start being grateful for the referees, and they start responding instead of just having these emotional blowups on referees. Their demonstration of how to respond to adversity and setback, it models to their players how to take ownership and responsibility. The coach that just constantly rips on the referees and blames them, that trickles down, and the players don't know how to respond to adversity or setback. They don't take personal responsibility or ownership. They just blame the referees as well. The parents blame the referees as well, and that becomes the story and the narrative after that, that close loss, and that just doesn't serve you. So by taking ownership and just focusing on being gratitude and not blaming the referees, I think it has a greater impact on the team culture and the type of people that we're trying to develop. All right, we've got two more topics here today, and that the next one is something that probably would not have been much of an issue for young JP because it wasn't really a big thing back when I started coaching, but that is social media. And there was definitely some times throughout my career where as social media came up, I was a little bit unsure how to even really use it or how to leverage that, and so probably just deferred to not using it that much. But when you think about social media use, what we're hearing a lot back from athletic directors and directors of clubs is that sometimes coaches' personal accounts are unprofessional, and the other thing is they don't know how to promote the culture that we're trying to create here in our athletic department or our club. And so, what would be your advice there, Betsy and Nate, for coaches, young coaches, around how to use both their personal social media accounts and their team accounts?
Yeah, for personal social media, and I encourage coaches to do this before you start coaching, but if you've already started, now would be a great time to revisit, does my personal account reflect who I want my players to take me to be and who I want my parents to understand that I am? And if anything on there is currently out of alignment, yes, it is your personal profile. And professionally, you have a responsibility to show up in a way that is consistent and in alignment with who you've asked your players and parents to know you as. So if anything is off there, I would recommend taking a look and then integrating to make sure that the social story tells the same story that you are verbalizing and modeling in terms of your behavior in that sport space. The second thing I'll say is, and I know this is very tempting for many coaches, especially depending on the level that you coach and the exposure of the team. There's a lot that might come at you as a coach, especially in terms of criticism or judgment from the peanut gallery of social media. People who've never seen your team play, who you've never met in person, will say things as if they know and as if they have context and as if they have authority. So the quote that always comes to mind for me is, "It's not what they call you, it's what you answer to." And just thinking through that, like, people may call you many things. They may make many criticisms about your coaching, about your decisions, and you don't have to respond. And your choice to not respond also says something. And it says something to your players and it says something to your parents of, hey, I'm not going to engage with folks that aren't part of our organization, that don't have the clear picture. While I will absolutely defend our team and I stand by my judgments and decisions, it's not a conversation that I need to spend energy having with people that aren't here. I'd rather have those conversations with you. So that would be on the personal side. On the team side, when I think about best practices, especially if you are the coach that is in charge of the team social media, let's say Instagram or Twitter, or sorry, X, formerly known as Twitter, thinking about that same consistency. Your high performers are likely going to have far more opportunities to be featured in social media, and they're going to get that acknowledgement, following games. So for me personally, if I'm a first-time coach or I'm thinking about how do I spread the love, is how do I find opportunities to really showcase the totality of our team? And if I look at any team's account and then aggregate the data over the course of a season, the people that play the most or start, I typically see a much higher rate of social media posts about them or involving them than I do individuals who don't play. So knowing that that's likely true in any sport context, thinking about how can I be intentional about featuring those that aren't likely going to get the game shots or the game minutes? And whether it's done in practice, you can take a picture of someone doing something in practice. You can give them a shout out on social media. It's never going to be even, but how can I be intentional about kind of lifting from the bottom and providing more visible opportunities to showcase individuals who may never get the minutes, but that I know as a coach are essential and invaluable part of our program. So that would be kind of my best recommendation. Number two would be along the same lines of consistency. Who are you on social media when you win? And who are you on social media when you lose? And can you find a consistency and common ground? With one program that I support, I can open social media after a game and immediately know whether they won or lost because there either is or isn't a post. They only post when they win. And so thinking about like, can you post whether you win or lose? Because that's also sending a message to your team that who we are isn't dictated by whether or not we were successful in this moment, that we're still going to find things to celebrate even when we lose, that we're still going to give credit to the other team for a game well played, that we're not just here in this space when things go well. So that would be something for a coach to consider as well.
Yeah, JP, I think we're making the assumption here that coaches are starting from a place where I have a separate account for the basketball program and for my personal life. It shocks me how many coaches don't, where they, it says at whatever, City Town ABC, and that's their Twitter handle. And that's where they post scores, and that's where they post about Black Lives Matter, and that's where they post about WWE highlights. It's very confusing, and I think that gets really messy about what is the program endorsing versus the individual. So if that isn't step one, is just making sure that there are separate handles, separate addresses for your personal and for your program account. It starts there. What we do is, we have a Twitter account for our basketball program, and we really try to frame it for the parents. I love what Betsy shared there. I think sometimes that's hard in 280 characters. Like, how do I say, well, JP really cheered his ass off today. Do I put that on Twitter, when he didn't play in the game? And so what we tell parents and players, and this is every year, is that I see our Twitter post after the game as my responsibility to media that's not coming, there are papers, there are outlets that will report on our games that don't come to our games. So I get 280 characters to summarize what happened in the game. So that's going to include the final score, probably the leading score or two, and a sentence about the game. And so that's what I'm doing with that. So I tell parents that because they will get upset if, Susie played whatever. She played 5 minutes and she had a basket and it was her first one of her varsity career. And why wasn't that on Twitter? And I'll tell her because Jeff Linder doesn't care about that at the Cedar Rapids Gazette. This is a message to the media that wants to understand what happened in the game. And I do think that's helped to tamp down a little bit of the petty jealousy sometimes that can arise from players or from parents. It's just, again, making clear that expectation. Then we also use Facebook for a separate page that, again, is a girls' basketball page where after games, because I don't sleep very well anyway, I'm going through the film. I'll pull 4 or 5 highlights that I'll download and then upload as just a quick reel onto Facebook. And I'll write a short summary of the game and the JV game as though I was the reporter at the game. So Twitter's 280 characters. Facebook is whatever, 4 to 6 paragraphs. Again, it's not long, and a paragraph about the JV game. And then, here's the next game, whatever. And so that's really for obviously the older crowd and grandma and grandpa that are wintering in Arizona. And I just make a commitment to myself that will be posted by 6 a.m. the next day. And I have a number of parents that the first thing they do in the morning after games is they repost that to their circles on Facebook and what have you. So it's a great way just to gather a little bit more attention and allow for some information that the outside media is not providing. This is another pet peeve of mine. It drives me crazy, and I say it all the time here. I cannot stand it when I want to follow another program, for example, at our school. I want to be a softball fan. I want to go to a volleyball game. I go to their social media, and I can't freaking figure out what time does the game start. Like on a game day, I think you should mandatory make an announcement of see you at the gym tonight, 6 o'clock JV, 7:15 varsity. If you can't make it, here's the link to the streaming site, whether that's home or away. I think that's the most basic service that you can possibly provide for people who want to follow your team. Make it as easy as possible for them to find that information so they don't have to go through a dozen website and Google searches to figure out the visiting teams, streaming site, and all that. Find that for them and post it every day. It sounds like a little thing, but it goes so far, in making it easy to follow your program. And I think that's part of the way we can leverage social media to your advantage, is to be able to, again, harness the ability to communicate through it and get rid of some of those boundaries and hurdles, that people have to not follow your team or have an excuse not to come to your games.
Yeah, I think just hearing both you talk, what really came up for me there was, what is the purpose of this social media account? Got to identify that. What you just shared there was some really good tips for someone that wants to promote viewership and support of the program. Just some great stuff there. And so I think, however the purpose will dictate a lot of what you do. I think if you're trying to, when you use social media to build your team's culture, to reinforce the culture you're creating there, and also, grow as a leader, impact other people, those types of things. I mean, that's kind of typically how I would look at social media on my end. And the first thing I would say, back to a little bit of what you guys touched on, is just provide value. So it could be resharing other people's content, but I also see some coaches that, share a daily tweet or a daily post there that is just something they're reflecting on, something that's inspiring. So it could be resharing some other good content, or it could be providing value so that if your players engage with it, the parents engage with it, or other people around the community engaged with it and watch those videos or read those tweets, that they would benefit from that. So we could use it to provide value. I think we can use it to reinforce the values of a program, to what Betsy talked about, and you talked about, Nate, there. I think you lose a match, it's a great opportunity to celebrate your opponents and what they did well. And also to celebrate, and trying to find video clips or opportunities to celebrate the behaviors that you are connected to your values as a program. Gratitude, effort, and love is what you guys have at Mount Vernon. So it's just, do we see that reinforced through our tweets and video posts, through clips that we're sharing, or are we just showing the highlights of the dunk or the 3-point shot, right? Or are we highlighting other type of behaviors or team events, moments off the court that we're spending together, that really touch back to our values. I think that's huge. Two of those small things, just build a community. I mean, on a personal level, I don't actually, like, the listeners might be going, well, JP, you post up all the time. I actually don't spend any time on social media. I create a lot of content. We get it out there. But I do follow. I used to probably follow everybody because, like, oh, that's the polite thing. And now, like, with Twitter, it's like, I think there's 100 people, and it's typically people that are either clients, or they're people that I say, well, they actually have content that it adds value to my life. There's a saying, garbage in, garbage out. If I'm following and it's just people bashing, or I'm just angry and frustrated, that doesn't lift me up. It doesn't serve me. And so I know myself, I'm not able to constantly look at that stream of information and people's outrage and anger and go on and show up as my best self. So that would be another thing. Last thing I'd share is just, and Betsy touched on this, don't let it determine your value. The number of followers you have, the number of retweets you have, the number of likes you have, or what people say about you. As a young JP, I spent time on the coach forums looking to see what they were saying about me. I'll be honest, like, I wanted to see what they were saying, and usually they weren't saying anything, but you might catch the occasional comment here, and it usually wasn't that positive, and then you'd lose sleep over it. Oh, that guy, he doesn't know what he's doing. It's just, why? Like, just focus on really the people's opinions that matter the most to you, and that's typically in your most inner circle. It's your family, and then maybe a little bit outside that, it's your assistant coaches and your players and the parents. And so if you do see a negative comment from a parent or a player about you, or sometimes it's kind of a passive aggressive comment about your program, that's not something to respond to on social media. It's something to go and have a conversation about with in person, would be my recommendation for young coaches.
I think another one that's important is that I always have my posts vetted before I post them. And I ask my assistant to read it from the angry eye of a parent, just to make sure that I'm not, like, saying something that makes sense to me because I'm the coach, but somebody that whatever, wasn't at the game might think, well, why did he say that, or why, or also that's honoring to our opponents, as you talked about before. So I think that's important, is just have an eye on those things. The other thing that you mentioned right there is, when it comes to reflecting our values, like especially at the end of the season, and I'm not good at it. Like I don't really like having to do all the social media posting stuff, but if I don't do it, right, like it's a missed opportunity. But we do talk with our kids about like, if you guys have fun pictures or a, video of the water celebration after a big win or something like that, like sometimes we'll post those things too, that give the outside community sort of an inside look, behind the curtain that they don't normally get. And last year we actually did that like every day leading up to the state tournament. So we practiced at Carver Hawkeye Arena, in Iowa City, and we took a team picture there and did a little post. And then we had donuts on Saturday, and then we honored the scout team on Sunday. And so every day we just kind of had a little quick glimpse of like, here's what we're up to as we get ready to state or go to state. And it was really interesting just to see, again, the metrics behind your posts and the impressions and the interactions just gradually go up and up and up, which I think was an awesome way to sort of start gathering a groundswell before we got to the state tournament. So I could never do that throughout the season. We've got other coaches here that are great at that, and they do it a lot. But I think when there are times that make sense, just to give a glimpse behind the curtain, is unique. And I think that helps to add, again, to that community that you're trying to build.
So our last one here is personal habits and self-care. And I'm going to challenge us here to, we can only give one tip in this category for the sake of time and also for the sake of sounding like a Huberman Lab podcast episode around self-care and doing all the 10 different things and eating all the juices and running and meditating on your head, right? So just if you could go back and just, challenge your younger self with like, hey, here's one thing that would be really beneficial for you to do for your growth or to be taking care of yourself, especially in season. What would that piece of advice be?
Mine is one answer, JP, but it has two parts. The first was like the aha moment. I was seeing my chiropractor, and we were talking about how much I've been traveling, and he and I are about the same age, and he said, Betsy, it's challenging for people like us who've been athletes our whole life. It's no longer about how hard you train; it's about how well you recover. And I remember like that moment, I was like, oh, because I'm looking at my schedule. I'm like, okay, where can I get a workout in? Where can I get a workout in? And I just recently, or because of that conversation, I got an Aura Ring. And with the data from the Aura Ring, I'm like, okay, this is cool. It gives me information, but I didn't really know what to do with that information until a buddy of mine named Jason said, hey, Bets, I want you to be part of this pilot program that we're developing for entrepreneurs. It uses the same information technology that we've been using with high performing athletes in the military for years, but we want to teach people how to make small adaptations in what they're already doing using the information that they're getting from either a Whoop watch or an Aura Ring in order to better manage how they show up day to day. And I was like, cool, I'm in. And so the company is now called Koya, Coya, and it's a nod to the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, which is one of the global blue zones where there's the highest rate of people who live over 100. And what I learned in that program was HRV, my heart rate variability. I didn't know what that stood for before, but I learned that it's your body communicating its ability to handle stress. And that the higher your HRV number from your baseline, the better your ability to handle stress, which means I'm recovering better. So for me, just taking that educational journey and learning what can I do to increase my body's ability to recover well, not that I'm minimizing the stresses of the day, not that I'm, doing the meditating on your head and the smoothie cleanse and all sorts of stuff that's also really helpful. But if I only change one thing, how do I increase my ability to recover? For me, that was implementing the 3-2-1 rule, which is 3 hours before bed, no more food, 2 hours before bed, no more work, which I know, coaches, big challenge, and then 1 hour before bed, no more blue light. And I have blue light glasses that I routinely wear. I often forget to do them in the evening if I'm unwinding with my spouse with a TV show or something. But that 3-2-1, sticking to that has really increased my HRV number. And I just feel better getting the same amount of sleep. The stresses of the day haven't changed, but that one small adaptation increases my ability to recover and then be able to attack the next day. So for self-care, that's been a huge shift for me.
JP, I think the most important thing that I've done over the years here, and this really isn't tied to personal habits or exercise or sleep or anything like that, but probably the most beneficial thing we've done is blurring the lines between family and basketball. I think sometimes we think about, our sport and our experience in coaching as I put my coach hat on and for the next 8 hours or 6 hours or, from midnight to 2 or whatever, I'm grinding through film or I'm at practice or what have you. And then when I go home with whatever's left, then I'm with my family for dinner for 45 minutes until I move to the next thing. And trying to compartmentalize that, I think typically has good intentions in mind because we think I'm trying to explicitly carve out times with my family during the season, and that's hard to do. But if that's all the time that they're getting and they're not seeing you in the arena, so to speak, you're missing a huge opportunity. And so, our kids are relatively young at 7 and 10. I've got an assistant that's got a newborn and a 2-year-old, and another assistant that's at 3 and 5. And, our practice looks like a daycare at the south end zone, when you look at it, because the kids are just getting all the crap out of the gym closet and, playing all kinds of games and stuff like that, because I want them to be part of the experience with me as much as possible. And so kids are at practice, kids sit on the end of the bench. When they get it old enough, they can go in the locker room if they want to. They are going with me on donut runs on Saturday mornings. Like that, they're just part of it. They'll ride the bus when it's appropriate. Like my wife helps with the stats. Like it's become a family endeavor because I don't know that my family would be able to persevere if we didn't. And so whatever ways that's appropriate, and every context obviously is going to be different. But I think if you can smudge those lines a little bit between what's family time and what's basketball time or your sporting um, responsibilities, I think that everybody's going to enjoy it a little bit more because it becomes a shared experience. And what I'm finding with my 10-year-old in particular is that when she starts to have conversations about things that she likes about basketball or some of her favorite memories from third grade, for example, it comes back to being in the locker room with Cameron Brand. It comes back to, those moments where she was on the bus the first time going to Solon, or whatever it might be. Like those can create some really special memories for kids too that help shape the experience of their childhood. So blurring those lines, bringing your spouse into it in whatever way is possible, I think it can make for a happier experience for everyone.
Yeah, what I love about what you shared there, Nate, is I think it's answering that question of really what are you willing to give up in sacrifice for coaching, and you've kind of found a really cool way that you're not actually giving up too much of your family time because you're just incorporating it into that. And the reality is there's always will be sacrifices that have to be made. And um, this is such a hard question to whittle down to one thing because something like reading for me has been so transformational and huge in my journey. But if I could really go back and tell young JP one thing, he probably wouldn't listen to this because it's so stinking hard. And at the time, probably a younger guy would be like, yeah, it's kind of just out there type of thing. And it's becoming more common now, but it's just meditate and learn to be aware of what's coming up for you. Like I start my day with meditation and mindfulness, and I periodically throughout the day have different, check-in points. And it's become so effective for me that like I know when I'm exhausted, I know what I need in this moment. And sometimes it is I need to go for a walk. Sometimes it is I need to take a nap. Sometimes I just need to go do the workout. It's not always the same thing. And so, but just being able to be aware of what's coming up for me emotionally, stress wise, and as a coach, to be able to step back and observe your thoughts and to have that awareness is really, really powerful. There's also a million other benefits. Right. So I had a problem with referees, right? I didn't want to, I had a problem with losing my temper. The meditation develops the strength to be able to press pause in those moments and to be less reactive. And so for young JP, that was probably would have been a huge tool in my or a practice to actually develop the ability to make those changes that I actually wanted to as a coach, but just struggled at for so long. So if there's one practice for self-care and growth, that would be it, because it's actually helps both of those things, right? It grows you as well as help you just to take care of yourself. So as we finish up here, I'm just going to throw this last question on the group here. And that is, in one sentence, if you could just give one sentence, one piece of advice, or one message to a young coach. It could be younger you. It could be, somebody that you deeply care about that, might end up going into coaching someday. Just what would that piece of advice be in one sentence?
Mine would be it's okay not to know. You're gonna figure it out. And I think similar with parenting, it's like you can do all the preparation you want, you can read all the books, you can ask all the questions, and there are inevitably are going to be things that come up that you are not prepared for, and that's okay. Like, you don't have to know, you're gonna figure it out.
Yeah, I think JP for me it would be just to remember your why and to be true to yourself. And I think of the times where coaching's gone off the rails for me, those things have been grounding, understanding who I am and who I am trying to become, and just remembering why am I doing this in the first place.
This is sort of thing I would share with my younger self, and I share it today with most coaches now. When I sign my books, and it's just simply, you are enough. You are enough. And that for me as a young coach, and still to this day, is like, is a big struggle. Have I done enough? Am I good enough? Have I accomplished enough? And just to have that self knowledge that I am enough as I am today is really, really important for us to be able to show up and be our best. So, as we wrap up, I just want to offer one more thing that really kind of came to me as I reflected on the conversation that you just listened to, especially the end there. When it comes to self care, the thing that I think most new coaches and most people need to understand, because I think this is the thing that I think many athletes, coaches, and just people in general get wrong, is this: we confuse pleasure with self-care. We think self-care is chilling out, watching Netflix, it's downtime on our phone, having a few beers, eating a pint of Ben and Jerry's, or going to get our nails done. And yes, I like those things. I have even gotten some pedicures in my day, and they are a brilliant and relaxing way to treat myself and chill with my wife. But all these types of things, especially done regularly, they are just pleasure. And while pleasure feels good, not only does it not help us grow, but too much of it, it's harmful. Now, there's nothing wrong with watching TV at night or scrolling on social media, but I'm sorry, that is not recharging, right? That is not self-care, especially when we choose to do these things instead of getting enough sleep, exercising, meal prepping for the next day, going for a walk in nature, reading or listening to a book that stretches us and challenges us, meditating, or whatever else it is that we really need to be doing to be working on ourselves and taking care of ourselves. So my final challenge to all coaches, not just new coaches, is to look at areas of your life that you regularly seek out pleasure as a way to disconnect from stress and anxiety, and start replacing that pleasure with some healthy self-care habits. Thanks again for listening to the Coaching Culture Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, share these episodes with someone that might find it valuable, and if you have the chance, please take just 30 seconds to leave us a review.